Hey guys, it's Andrew from ThinkAside, and I wanted to talk a little bit about inflation and the idea that I think the general understanding of inflation is that it just is, right? We see it in everything that we do, everything that we experience in life as time goes on, everything increases in value. So we buy a house and we expect that next year it's going to be worth more money, right? We expect that next year we're probably going to have to pay a little more money for a product. We see everything go up and that is just normal. Well, what if it didn't have to be? What if inflation is only one way of creating a society, of creating a civilization and allowing it to move forward? The idea is that inflation encourages productivity, that it encourages us to buy things and put money into things, and then of course we're able to take that money and create more things, and it kind of creates that cycle. But unfortunately the cycle is that it's a spiral. It continues to go and go and go, and as inflation increases, then of course that spiral starts to spiral even more. It eventually crashes, and eventually our money is worth nothing, and as a result we have to reset. That reset is oftentimes, as Jeff Booth has said, is historically, oftentimes that is done through war. It is done to kind of reset the dollar. I mean, you see it with the United States, right? Like we founded the United States, and then as a result, we had based on gold. At some point, and I think it was 1971, I want to say, that was debased. It's no longer based on gold, and as a result, you're able to create as much money as you want in circulation without tied to anything. So you could just do an infinite amount if you wanted to. And so that's where inflation started to get out of hand, and that's where it starts to continue to get out of hand and go even more out of hand. And so without getting too much into inflation itself, I wanted to pose the idea that what if inflation didn't have to be, and instead we could have a deflationary society? So what if you could just deflate everything over time, right? So instead of things getting more expensive over time, so for you to say buy the new iPhone over time, that it costs more money or that it costs as much money, what if instead you could pay less money over time for that same product or for the newest product? So say you bought a TV this year, it's the newest TV, and you spend $800. Then next year you buy the newest TV and it costs $780. That is effectively what deflation would be, at least in my head. And the idea of that is that it becomes more efficient. Technology over time becomes more efficient, and as a result, it's a counter inflation, right? So it counters inflation, and as time goes on, it becomes more efficient, and so as a result, things deflate more. And so if you could do this, then say that $780 TV next year, what if 5 years from now it instead costs $500, right? And so you would effectively need less money in circulation, and there would be less money in circulation, but it would allow for things to become more efficient. It would allow things to become cheaper, but it would create an efficiency that would kind of negate the divide between the rich and the poor, at least more so, because there's not going to be to the point where you have these people that have these assets accruing crazy amounts of money, and then you have these people that are working hourly jobs like me, and we're still making about the same amount of money, give or take a couple dollars an hour, excuse me, for the last 5 years. You know what I mean? And that's where that divide comes from, because wages don't increase as much as the inflation of money, and so as a result, you have people who have assets and they're accruing crazy amounts of money, and they're increasing the money that they're accruing every single year with inflation. Meanwhile, we're barely increasing the money that we get. We might be increasing our investments, but it's only close to what inflation is. So, of course, that gets into Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin is kind of a counter deflation, and how it's kind of that bridge to the possible, you could say, the new civilization, the idea of a deflationary civilization versus an inflationary, which is what the world only knows. As far as I know, we've never had a deflationary society. We've always had an inflationary one. And so it's kind of like something completely new that we haven't really, I don't want to say we've not given it much thought, but I think I mean, you could argue that the powers that be wouldn't really like that, and you could get into blockchain and how blockchain is kind of stopping that divide in general, and how it's taking the power and it's spreading it to everyone who is willing to, buy a piece of the pie, put some money into it. But all I'm trying to achieve here is just the idea of putting that thought in your head that inflation might not be a good thing. It might not be what we think it is, and it very well might be heading for disaster. And that's where that great reset comes from, and the idea that we need to prepare for something like that. And I mean, even if nothing happens, if we prepare for it, then we're going to be far better off tomorrow than we were today, regardless. And we're still going to have more money and all that good stuff. And so, all I intend to do here is not to convince you that deflation is good and inflation is bad, or that deflation is solved this way and inflation is solved this way, whatever. It's just the idea that let's think aside from what we think is normal and what we think is okay and what is good, and let's consider the idea that maybe it isn't. And I'll leave you, the viewer, to go and do some research and look at Jeff Booth, look at a few interviews from him, read his book, and decide for yourself and make your own conclusions. I mean, some people would say that conclusions are shutting doors to life, but come up with your own opinions and thoughts on this possibility, and come up with your own solutions to solve them, so that way we can prepare for the future regardless of what that is. Thank you.